All right, so we're just going to try and complete some notes today in class. We already started talking about um, trying to figure out how to deal with limiting reactants, trying to predict how much of a product you could actually make. Now we have to talk about this percent yield, which is actually a fairly simple concept. It's not that big of a deal. You just have to understand there's a difference between theoretical yield, which is what we've been calculating, right? Given a certain amount of a reactant, how much of this product can you make, right? And an actual yield, right? In reality, most reactions do not go through to completion, so you won't actually make as much of a product as you expect to make. Maybe you thought you were going to make 5 grams, but you only made 4 grams, right? So this percent yield actually kind of tells you how well you did in producing that product, how successful you were, right? And depending on what it is that you're doing, if you are making a chemical for a living, you better be pretty good at making that chemical because sometimes those reactants are really expensive. So if you worked in a pharmaceutical company and you're supposed to make a drug, you should have a pretty high percent yield when it's all said and done. But it's a simple calculation. It's pretty easy to do. All you need to know is an actual value, which you would actually have to weigh. You'd have to actually um, obtain some product and find out how much of it you actually produced, right? So you'd actually measure that directly. But then you'd also have that work we did beforehand to tell you how much it was possible to make. So again, you're not actually going to make all of that, but how close were you to making all of that? That's what this is supposed to tell you. So you take actual divided by theoretical, multiply by 100. Should actually be pretty simple. Okay, so this problem using yield, or where you have to use yield, talks about this chlorobenzene that I'm trying to produce. And I'm going to react 36.8 grams of benzene. And those of you from biochem last year should recognize benzene. It's a 6-carbon ring with the localized electrons inside of it. Right, there were actually those 3 double bonds that just kept moving throughout that ring, which is what made this an aromatic hydrocarbon, which gave it specific properties when it's all said and done. But I'm going to react that with an excess of chlorine gas trying to create chlorobenzene. So what you're trying to understand here is I'm still going to have to do the same things I did before. I want to know how much of a product I could possibly make, right? In this case, it tells me that I'm actually going to produce 38.8 grams of that chlorobenzene. But how much could I have made in theory? That's what I still need to know. So I'm going to do all the same things I did before, and it should be fairly simple and straightforward. I know sometimes this work is bulky, but it should actually be getting easy by now as you continue to practice it. So if I started with 36.8 grams of benzene, so that's that C6H6, I want to know how many moles that is. So again, I just kind of have to add things up and do what I got to do. So 6 carbons and 6 hydrogens. I take 6 times 12.01 plus 6.06. Gotta work this out on a calculator. Can't do it in my head. I get a mass of 78.12 grams per mole. And then I got to do my ratio like always. And this is a 1-to-1 ratio up here, so this should be pretty simple. Right? I don't even really barely have to do this except for to cancel a couple labels, right? So this is the stuff I'm making. This is the stuff I had, the benzene. So I got labels canceling, grams here, benzene there. So I have moles of my chlorobenzene. And chlorobenzene is going to have a slightly different mass. So I'm going to have to subtract a hydrogen, but then I'm going to add chlorine. So Hold on a second, I might have to check that out real quick here on a periodic table. Mass for chlorine, 35.45. I thought it was that, but I wasn't gonna get this wrong just because I thought that was the number. So my new mass is now 112.56. Hopefully somebody's checking me on this. Oops, pen going crazy again. So then I just need to multiply and divide, and this should give me a theoretical answer. So 36.8 times 112.56, and then I divide by that 78.12. So in theory, I should be able to make 53 grams of that chlorobenzene. Now I need 3 sig figs, so I should round that more appropriately. It's actually 53.0 grams of that chlorobenzene. But again, it says that my actual yield of chlorobenzene is 38.8. So that's the final step here. I just want to judge how successful I was. So I'm going to start out with that 38.8, my actual. I'm going to divide it by my theoretical 53.0. And then I'm going to multiply by 100. And that should give me 8%. And my percent in this case with 3 sig figs is 73.2. Now notice there were labels here, grams and grams, but the grams just go away. In this case, it's just a percent answer. You don't have a gram label on it. So I made 73%, 73.2% of what I expected to make, which is actually fairly high. 73% doesn't sound like a great number, considering that's barely passing in a education standpoint. But in terms of creating a chemical in a lab, that's actually a fairly high percentage, right? You'd be pretty good, really good, if it was above 90%, right? So 70% is fine. It's when you're getting less than 50% yield that you'd really be worried that you're not doing something right. But again, the more effective you can be, the more cost effective that is. So you'd want to have as high a percentage as possible. And this is just judging you on that. So the only thing that you have to really be careful about is maybe you would look at this and you'd say, oh, why don't I just take 36.8 and divide it by 38.8 and get a percent from there? Well, because that's not what it is, right? You have to pay attention to what it's giving you. What do you have to come up with? In this case, I needed a theoretical yield. I didn't know how much I should have made. It just told me how much I did make. So you're just checking work and going through, doing what you need to do. So you should be able to do the rest of that worksheet I gave you. Otherwise, if you guys have questions, just talk to me about it tomorrow in class. Do as much as you can, and we'll see what happens from there.